What would you do if, after years of loyalty, you were thrown out of your job like you never mattered? For David, that nightmare was real until one shocking encounter with a billionaire turned his entire life upside down. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on the bell. You don't want to miss stories like this one. David's hand shook as he gathered the papers, his 29 years of careful planning crumbling like the soggy documents in his grip. He'd been Employee of the Month 4 times. He'd stayed late, came in early, skipped vacations. None of it mattered now. He was just another casualty in someone else's profit margin. Budget cuts, Mr. Peterson had said, not even looking up from his computer screen. Nothing personal. Chun. Just business. Just business. As if David's rent wasn't personal. As if the promise he'd made to his mother about finally being stable wasn't personal. As if the engagement ring he'd been saving for wasn't the most personal thing in his world. The elevator shuddered to a stop at the ground floor, and David stepped into the marble lobby that had once felt like a second home. Now it felt like a mausoleum, cold, echoing, and filled with the ghosts of who he used to be. His reflection in the polished floor showed a man he barely recognized. Shoulders slumped, 5 o'clock shadow at 2 in the afternoon. Eyes had lost their spark somewhere between the pink slip and the security guard's sympathetic nod. Mr. Chun? The receptionist's voice was gentle, pitying. Don't forget to turn in your building pass. The plastic card felt heavier than the box in his arms. He placed it on the counter with the careful precision of a man trying not to fall apart in public. Take care of yourself, she whispered. Take care of yourself. With what? With the $347 in his checking account? With a stack of bills growing on his kitchen counter, like some malicious paper garden? The revolving door spat him out onto Fifth Avenue, where the October wind cut through his shirt, like it knew exactly where to find his vulnerability. The sky was the color of old pewter, pregnant with the promise of rain, and David had forgotten his umbrella upstairs in his desk drawer, his former desk drawer. He fumbled for his phone, thumb hovering over his girlfriend Jenny's contact. How do you tell someone you love that you just became everything you promised you'd never be again? How you explain that the stability she'd finally learned to count on just evaporated like morning dew? Instead, he scrolled to his mother's number. David, you never call during work hours. Is everything. I lost my job, Mom. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. In the background, he could hear the television, some daytime talk show discussing home foreclosures. The irony wasn't lost on him. Oh, honey. Her voice carried 27 years of loving a son who couldn't quite seem to catch a break. What happened? Downsizing. Corporate restructuring. Pick your favorite euphemism, for David's life just imploded. Come home. We'll figure this out together. Home. To the 2-bedroom apartment where his mother worked double shifts at the diner just to keep the lights on. Where success was measured in survived months rather than accumulated wealth. Where love was abundant but opportunity was as rare as rain in the desert. I can't, Mom. I need to. The first raindrops began to fall, fat and cold against his forehead. I need to figure this out myself. David Chun, you listen to me. Her voice carried that particular tone that had gotten him through algebra homework and heartbreak in equal measure. Being strong doesn't mean being alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let people help you. But as David ended the call and looked up at the gleaming towers of corporate success surrounding him, he felt anything but brave. He felt like a fraud who'd been found out, a small-town dreamer who'd finally collided with reality. The rain began in earnest now, turning the sidewalk into a slick obstacle course of puddles and reflected neon. David shifted the box to one arm and tried to flag down a taxi, but they swept past him like he was invisible, just another casualty of the city's relentless pace. What do you think drives people to their breaking points? Have you ever felt like David in this moment, where everything stable suddenly crumbles? Share your thoughts below about those moments that test our resilience. His phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. Dinner tonight? That new Italian place? The Italian place where entrees cost more than his weekly grocery budget. The Italian place where he'd planned to propose next month, when his Christmas bonus came through and made the ring payment possible. He typed and deleted a dozen responses, each one feeling more pathetic than the last. Finally, rain check? Long day. Long day. Long life, more like it. The cardboard box was getting soggy, its structural integrity failing like everything else in David's world. He clutched it tighter, but physics and precipitation don't respect desperation. The bottom gave way just as he reached the intersection of 5th and Madison, sending 5 years of professional life, awards, photos, his lucky coffee mug, the small cactus Jenny had given him, tumbling onto the wet pavement. No, no, no. David dropped to his knees, scrambling to collect the scattered pieces of his identity. The award for Outstanding Marketing Campaign 2023 had cracked down the middle. His business cards were dissolving into papier-mâché. The cactus lay on its side, dirt bleeding into the puddle like a tiny crime scene. People flowed around him like water around a stone, their umbrellas creating a moving canopy of indifference. Nobody stopped. Nobody offered help. This was New York, after all, where other people's disasters were just weather delays. David's hand shook as he tried to salvage what he could, rain mixing with something he refused to acknowledge as tears. This was it. This was rock bottom. 32 years old, kneeling on a sidewalk, watching his career dissolve in real time. Here, let me help. The voice cut through the white noise of rain and traffic, warm, authoritative, unexpectedly gentle. David looked up to see a woman kneeling beside him, her hands already reaching for his scattered belongings. She was elegant in a way that money couldn't buy, though money had clearly helped. Her coat was charcoal wool, probably worth more than David's monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon that somehow managed to look effortless despite obvious professional styling. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold, deep brown, intelligent, and carrying a kindness that seemed at odds with her clearly privileged world. "You don't have to," David started, but she was already carefully lifting his broken award, examining the crack with the focused attention of someone used to fixing problems. "Everyone needs help sometimes," she said simply, and something in her tone suggested she knew more about needing help than her appearance would suggest. Together, they gathered the pieces of David's professional life, working in a silence that somehow felt more intimate than conversation. Her hands were soft but sure, and she handled his belongings with a care that made his chest tight with gratitude. When they'd salvaged what they could, she stood and extended her hand to help him up. For a moment, their eyes met, and David felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared humanity beneath their different circumstances. "Thank you," he managed, his voice rougher than he'd intended. She smiled, and it transformed her entire face from merely beautiful to something approaching luminous. "You're welcome. And for what it's worth," she gestured to his broken award. "Outstanding Marketing Campaign sounds impressive. Whatever happened today, it doesn't erase what you've accomplished." Before David could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd like some well-dressed guardian angel. He stood there in the rain, holding the soggy remains of his career, but feeling something he hadn't felt in hours: hope. 27 floors above the sidewalk where David Chun was collecting the pieces of his shattered career, Isabella Moreau stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the rain turn the city into an impressionist painting. At 34, she commanded Moreau Industries with the kind of quiet authority that made Forbes take notice and competitors lose sleep. Her empire stretched across 3 continents, built on a foundation of sustainable technology and ruthless business acumen. She was worth $2.3 billion, according to the latest estimates, though she'd stopped counting after the first billion. Numbers, after a certain point, became meaningless. Just another way of keeping score in a game she'd already won. But today, the numbers fell heavy. Isabella? Her assistant Marcus knocked on the glass door of her office. The Chun Industries meeting has been moved to next Thursday. Something about their lead negotiator having a family emergency. Isabella nodded without turning away from a window. Below, people scurried like ants, each carrying their own invisible burdens. Somewhere down there, marriages were ending, babies were being born, dreams were dying, and she was removed from all of it by steel glass and the insulating buffer of wealth. Also, Marcus continued, consulting his tablet with the efficiency of someone who managed a billionaire's life down to the minute. Your mother called. 3 times. Isabella's reflection in the window showed the slight tightening around her eyes that was the only outward sign of her inner recoil. What did you tell her? That you were in meetings. As usual. Good. Cancel my dinner tonight. I want to review the Morrison acquisition files again. Isabella. Marcus's voice carried the gentle reproach of someone who'd worked for her for 7 years and had earned the right to occasional honesty. When's the last time you went home before midnight? Home is where the work isn't waiting. She finally turned from the window, her smile sharp and practiced. Besides, empty penthouses echo. The office has better acoustics. It was meant to be a joke, but Marcus's expression suggested it had landed more like a confession. After he left, Isabella returned to her window vigil. The rain was getting heavier, turning the afternoon prematurely dark. Somewhere in the building across the street, office lights were beginning to flicker on. Other people's lives continuing their predictable rhythms, while hers remained suspended in the amber of success. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Darling, the Hendersons are having their anniversary party next month. They specifically asked if you're seeing anyone. Should I tell them you're still married to your work? Isabella deleted the message without responding. At 6:47 p.m., she finally left her office, taking the private elevator to the parking garage where her driver waited with the Bentley. The ride to her penthouse normally took 23 minutes, but today traffic moved with the sluggish persistence of cold honey. Terrible weather for October, her driver, James, commented, navigating around a stalled taxi. Makes everyone drive like they've forgotten how. Isabella made a non-committal sound, her attention caught by something on the sidewalk. A man was kneeling in the rain, frantically trying to collect scattered papers and office supplies from a growing puddle. People flowed around him like he was invisible, their umbrellas creating a moving canopy of indifference. James, pull over. Ma'am, pull over. Now. The Bentley glided to the curb with the whisper-quiet precision of German engineering. Isabella was out of the car before James could open her door, rain immediately soaking through her wool coat. She'd acted on impulse, but as she approached the kneeling figure, something crystallized in her chest. Here was raw human need, unfiltered by boardroom politics or social expectations. Here was someone whose pain was visible, uncomplicated, real. Here, let me help. The man looked up, and Isabella felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. His face was angular, with the kind of strong jaw that suggested both stubbornness and integrity. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead by rain, and his eyes, God, his eyes were the color of storm clouds, filled with vulnerability that made her chest tight. But it wasn't his appearance that stopped her breath. It was the way he looked at her, not with the calculated assessment she was used to, not with the mix of desire and opportunism that characterized most of her interactions with men. He looked at her with simple, grateful humanity. You don't have to, he started, but she was already kneeling beside him, her $1,000 coat soaking up sidewalk water without a second thought. Everyone needs help sometimes. The words came from somewhere deeper than her usual social vocabulary. As she carefully lifted his broken award, Outstanding Marketing Campaign 2023, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. The simple pleasure of helping another human being without agenda, without calculation, without benefit to herself. They worked in silence, gathering the pieces of what was clearly this man's professional life. His hands were steady despite their trembling. Artist hands, she noticed, with long fingers and calluses that spoke of someone who built things, who created, not the soft, manicured hands of her usual circle. When they collected everything salvageable, she stood and offered him her hand. The moment their skin connected, something electric passed between them. Not attraction, exactly, though that was certainly part of it. Something deeper, recognition, as if they'd been looking for each other, without knowing it. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion that he was clearly trying to contain. Isabella smiled, feeling her carefully constructed professional mask slip for the first time in months. "You're welcome. And for what it's worth," she gestured his broken award. "Outstanding Marketing Campaign sounds impressive. Whatever happened today, it doesn't erase what you've accomplished." She wanted to say more, to ask his name, to understand what had brought him to his knees on a rainy sidewalk. But James was waiting, and her world was calling, and the distance between their realities felt suddenly vast and unbridgeable. So she walked away, leaving him standing in the rain with his soggy cardboard box, but carrying something new in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the Bentley's heated leather seats. "Everything all right, ma'am?" James asked as they pulled back into traffic. Isabella touched a wet spot on her coat, where she'd knelt on the pavement. "Fine, James. Everything's fine." But as they drove through the neon-bright corridors of her privileged life, Isabella found herself thinking about storm-cloud eyes and steady hands, about the way someone could look grateful without looking weak, about the last time she'd done something purely kind without calculating return on investment. Back in her penthouse that night, 3,000 square feet of marble and silence overlooking Central Park. She stood at another window, looking down at the city where somewhere a man named David Chun was trying to rebuild his life from the pieces scattered on a wet sidewalk. She didn't know his name yet, but she couldn't stop thinking about the way he looked at her. Not like she was Isabella Moreau, billionaire CEO, but like she was simply a woman who'd chosen to stop and help when no one else would. For the first time in years, Isabella fell asleep thinking about someone other than herself. David stared at his laptop screen, the cursor blinking mockingly in the empty job application field marked current employment status. 3 days after the layoff, he'd applied to 47 positions, received 3 automated rejection emails, and heard nothing but digital silence from the rest. His studio apartment felt smaller each day, the walls pressing closer, like the slow crush of financial reality. Jenny had been understanding, too understanding, which somehow made it worse. Her careful optimism, her gentle suggestions about taking time to reassess, her offer to help with expenses all landed like tiny paper cuts to his pride. The business card he'd meant to throw away sat on his desk like an accusation. Morrison and Associates, David Chun, Senior Marketing Specialist. Past tense now. Everything was past tense. His phone buzzed. "Mom again. Any luck today, honey?" Define luck. David minimized the job site and opened his email, hoping against hope for something other than credit card offers and LinkedIn notifications. "Unless you count discovering that my industry experience is apparently worth less than a barista certification." "David, sorry, Mom. I'm just..." He paused, staring at an email that had just appeared in his inbox. The sender made his breath catch. @Morrow@MorrowIndustries.com. Subject line, about yesterday. "Mom, I need to call you back." "But..." I love you. Call you back. David's hand trembled slightly as he opened the email. Asterisk Mr. Chun. I hope you don't mind that I had my assistant track down your contact information. After our encounter yesterday, I found myself wondering if you'd managed to dry out your things, particularly that award. Outstanding Marketing Campaign 2023 was quite impressive. Asterisk. I'm writing because Morrow Industries has an opening in our marketing division. It's not traditional recruitment, I admit, but sometimes the best opportunities come from the most unexpected circumstances. If you're interested, please contact my assistant Marcus at the number below to arrange an interview. Best regards, Isabella Morosio, Morrow Industries. P.S. I still have your business card. It got mixed in with the items we collected. I'd be happy to return it, though I suspect you might be ready for a new one. David read the email 3 times, his heart rate increasing with each pass. Isabella Morrow. He'd heard the name whispered in business circles with the kind of reverence usually reserved for mythical creatures. Forbes 30 under 30, then 40 under 40. The woman who'd built a sustainable technology empire before most people figured out what sustainability meant. And she'd been the one kneeling in the rain, helping him collect the pieces of his broken career. His finger hovered over the reply button for 10 minutes. This was insane. This was charity. This was... His phone rang. Jenny. Hey, babe. How was the job hunt today? David closed the laptop. Same as yesterday. I've been thinking. Jenny's voice carried that careful tone she used when she was about to suggest something she thought he wouldn't like. Maybe this is a sign. Maybe it's time to consider something different. Different how? My dad's construction company is hiring. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work, good benefits. You could... I'm not a construction worker, Jen. There's nothing wrong with construction work. I didn't say there was. I said I'm not a construction worker. I'm a marketing professional with 5 years of experience in brand development and campaign management. You're an unemployed marketing professional. The words hung between them like smoke. True, brutal, necessary. That was unkind, Jenny said after a moment, but accurate. David, I'm trying to help. I know you are, and I love you for it, but I need to do this my way. After they hung up, David opened a laptop again and stared at Isabella Morrow's email. Part of him wanted to delete it, to pretend this fairy tale opportunity had never materialized. Taking help from a stranger felt like admitting he couldn't handle his own life. Taking help from a billionaire felt like accepting charity. But another part of him, the part that was tired of pride being more expensive than his rent, wanted to hit reply and type yes in capital letters. Meanwhile, in her penthouse office, Isabella was having her own crisis of confidence. You did what? Her brother Philippe asked, his voice crackling through the video call from the London office. Behind him, the Thames glittered in the afternoon sun, 8 hours ahead and a world away from her midnight doubts. I offered him a job interview. A complete stranger. A qualified marketing professional who you met while he was having a breakdown on a sidewalk. Isabella winced. Philippe had a talent for reducing complex situations to their most unflattering components. He wasn't having a breakdown. He was dealing with an unfortunate circumstance with dignity. By kneeling in the rain, by trying to salvage what he could from a bad situation, Isabella stood and walked to her window, where the city sparkled like a circuit board against the black sky. Besides, we need someone in marketing. The Peterson account is understaffed, and... Isabella. Philippe's voice softened. What's really going on? The question hung in the air between them, transmitted across continents via fiber optic cables and satellite connections. What was really going on? Isabella had been asking herself the same question for 3 days. I can't stop thinking about him. Romantically? No. Yes. I don't know. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Do you remember when we were kids and Mom would drive us past the homeless shelters at Christmas? How she'd always say, "There but for the grace of God"? I remember you being 8 years old and wanted to bring them all home. This felt like that. Like here was someone who needed help, and I had the power to provide it. And for once in my life, I could do something purely good without calculating the return on investment. And now you're second-guessing yourself. Now I'm wondering if I'm just playing God with someone else's life, because mine feels empty. Philippe was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was gentle. Isabella, you spent the last 10 years building an empire. Maybe it's time to remember that empires are meant to protect people, not isolate the empress. After the call ended, Isabella sat in her chair, spinning slowly as she considered Philippe's words. Through her window, the city spread out like a promise or a threat, depending on your perspective. Her computer chimed with an email notification. David Chin had replied, *, Ms. Moreau. Thank you for your unexpected kindness, both on the sidewalk and now in your offer. I'm honored that you would consider me for a position at Moreau Industries. However, I need you to know that I'm interested in earning this opportunity, not being given it. If you're willing to put me through the same interview process as any other candidate, I would welcome the chance to prove myself. I hope you'll understand that while I'm grateful for your help, I need to rebuild my career on merit, not charity. Respectfully, David Chun. P.S. Please keep the business card. You're right. I'm ready for a new one. *. Isabella read the email twice, then leaned back in her chair and smiled. The first genuine smile she'd felt in weeks. David Chun, it seemed, was full of surprises. What would you do in David's situation? Would you accept help from a stranger, or would pride get in the way of opportunity? And what about Isabella? Is she being genuinely kind, or is there something more complex driving her actions? Share your thoughts below. The Moreau Industries building rose 43 floors into Manhattan sky, like a glass and steel declaration of intent. David stood on the sidewalk outside, adjusting his tie for the fourth time in as many minutes. His best suit, the navy one he bought for his college graduation, felt tight across the shoulders, a reminder of how long it had been since he needed a dress for success. "You've got this," he muttered under his breath, practicing the confident handshake he'd rehearsed in his bathroom mirror. "You've got this." But as he pushed through the revolving doors into the marble cathedral of the lobby, David felt like an imposter in a temple built for titans. Everything gleamed with the kind of aggressive perfection that money could buy, from the receptionist's artificially white smile to the abstract sculptures that probably cost more than his yearly salary. "David Chun from Marcus Du Bois," he told the receptionist, proud that his voice only shook slightly. 32nd floor. Elevators are to your right. The elevator ride felt like ascending through layers of privilege. Each floor that passed took him further from a world he knew and deeper into Isabella Moreau's rarefied atmosphere. By the time the doors opened on 32, David's palms were sweating despite the building's aggressive air conditioning. Marcus Du Bois turned out to be an impeccably dressed man in his early 40s, with the kind of polished efficiency that suggested he could organize a hostile takeover before lunch and still have time for a perfect cappuccino. His office was smaller than David had expected, but every surface spoke of quiet luxury. Leather-bound books, a vintage Mont Blanc pen set, photographs of Marcus with various world leaders that were displayed with studied casualness. "Mr. Chun," Marcus stood and extended his hand. "Isabella speaks very highly of you." "We've barely spoken," David replied, then immediately regretted the honesty. Job interviews weren't the place for brutal truth-telling. Marcus smiled. "Sometimes first impressions are the most accurate. Please sit." The interview began normally enough. Marcus walked through David's resume with the methodical precision of someone who'd evaluated thousands of careers. David found his rhythm, explaining his campaigns, discussing his approach to brand development, outlining his vision for sustainable marketing in an environmentally conscious world. Impressive, Marcus said, making notes on his tablet. Your work on the Henderson account shows real innovation. Increasing their market share by 37% in 18 months is notable. David felt a flutter of hope. Maybe this wasn't charity after all. Maybe Isabella had seen something in him worth considering on its own merits. That's when the fire alarm started shrieking. Probably just a drill, Marcus said, but his expression suggested otherwise. The intercom crackled to life with the building's automated evacuation message, followed by a security guard's voice. This is not a drill. Please evacuate immediately via the nearest stairwell. Marcus stood, his professional composure intact despite the chaos. Well, this is unfortunate timing. We'll have to continue this later. They joined the stream of employees flowing toward the emergency stairs. David's interview momentum evaporating with each step down the concrete stairwell. 32 flights of stairs in a wool suit, while breathing recycled air and listening to hundreds of conversations echo off concrete walls. It wasn't exactly the professional impression he'd hoped to make. By floor 20, David was loosening his tie. By floor 15, his shirt was sticking to his back. By floor 10, he was genuinely worried he might pass out and tumble down the stairs like some corporate avalanche. That's when he saw her. Isabella Moreau was 5 steps ahead, moving with the fluid grace of someone who clearly spent time in the gym. She'd shed her suit jacket, revealing a silk blouse that somehow managed to look fresh despite the building's evacuation. Her hair had come slightly loose from its professional chignon, softening the sharp angles of her face. She turned, perhaps sensing his stare, and their eyes met across the crowded stairwell. For a moment, the chaos around them faded. The conversations, the footsteps, the general complaint of hundreds of people being inconvenienced by what was probably a false alarm. Mr. Chun? She moved against the flow of traffic to reach him, her expression shifting from CEO to the woman who'd knelt in the rain. What are you doing here? Interview. David managed, grateful that his breathlessness could be attributed to 32 flights of stairs rather than her proximity. With Marcus, until the building decided to evacuate. Isabella glanced around at the press of bodies, the concrete walls, the emergency lighting that cast everything in an industrial amber glow. Something shifted in her expression, a decision being made. This way, she said, touching his elbow with a familiarity that sent warmth up his arm. She led him to a small landing between floors, where a maintenance door stood slightly ajar. Beyond it, David could see what looked like a service area. Pipes, electrical panels, the building's hidden infrastructure. Emergency services, Isabella explained, producing a key card, one of the advantages of owning the building. The service elevator was smaller than the passenger versions, designed for equipment rather than people. When the doors closed, David found himself in a space roughly the size of a large closet with Isabella Moreau, close enough to smell her perfume, something expensive but understated, like jasmine and clean laundry. I should explain, Isabella said as the elevator began its descent, about the job offer. David's heart sank. Here it came, the charitable explanation, the kind gesture that was never meant to be taken seriously. I know what you're thinking, she continued. Rich woman feeling guilty about her privilege, throwing job offers at strangers to assuage her conscience. Are you? Isabella was quiet for a moment, studying the floor numbers as they descended. When she looked up, her expression was more vulnerable than he'd expected. Honestly, I don't know. I've been asking myself the same question for 3 days. She leaned against the elevator wall. I can tell you why I told myself I offered you the interview. Because you clearly have talent, because we need someone in marketing, because sometimes the best candidates come from unexpected places. And the real reason? The real reason is that in 34 years, no one has ever looked at me the way you looked at me on that sidewalk. David felt something shift in his chest. How did I look at you? Like I was just a person. Not Isabella Moreau, the CEO. Not Isabella Moreau, the billionaire. Not Isabella Moreau, the woman whose every interaction is calculated and transactional. Just a person who stopped to help. The elevator shuddered to a stop at the ground floor, but neither of them moved to press the button that would open the doors. For what it's worth, David said quietly, "That's exactly what I saw. A person who chose to be kind when she didn't have to be." Isabella smiled, and it transformed her entire face. "Is that why you insisted on earning the job rather than being given it?" "Partly. And partly because I've been unemployed for less than a week, and I'm already tired of people looking at me like I'm broken." "You're not broken." "How do you know?" "Because broken people don't kneel in the rain trying to save a cactus." David laughed despite himself. "It was a gift from my girlfriend. Seemed wrong to let it die just because I lost my job." Something flickered across Isabella's face. Disappointment, maybe, or recognition of complications she hadn't considered. "She sounds thoughtful." "She is. She's—" David paused, realizing he was about to describe Jenny to the woman, who was rapidly becoming the most interesting person he'd met in years. "She's been very patient with my unemployment situation." "Patient?" Isabella repeated the word like she was testing its flavor. "That's important in a relationship." "What about you? Are you seeing anyone?" The question slipped out before David could stop it, crossing professional boundaries with reckless abandon. But something about this elevator, this moment, this woman who'd shed her CEO armor to reveal something achingly human, made normal social rules feel irrelevant. "I'm seeing lots of people," Isabella said. "Board members, investors, politicians, other CEOs. Very important people who want very important things from me." "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant." She looked at him directly, her brown eyes holding secrets he couldn't quite decipher. "No, David, I'm not seeing anyone. Haven't been for a long time." The elevator suddenly felt smaller, charged with possibilities neither of them was ready to name. David became hyper-aware of everything. The sound of Isabella's breathing, the way she was worrying her bottom lip with her teeth, the fact that they were alone together in a space designed for two. "We should probably—" Isabella gestured toward the elevator buttons. "Probably," David agreed, but neither of them moved. Instead, they stood in the mechanical hum of the service elevator. Two people from different worlds who'd found themselves in the same small space, breathing the same air, asking themselves the same dangerous questions about what happened when loneliness met opportunity. Finally, Isabella reached past David to press the button for the lobby. Her arm brushed his chest, and the contact sent electricity through both of them, a spark of connection that neither could pretend not to feel. The doors opened onto the building's main lobby, where hundreds of evacuated employees milled around in various states of annoyance and confusion. The spell was broken, reality reasserting itself with fluorescent lighting and the sound of normal human commerce. "Ms. Moreau." Marcus appeared at Isabella's elbow, his professional composure intact despite having just walked down 32 flights of stairs. "The fire department says it was a false alarm. Something about a contractor triggering the smoke detection system on 41. "Good." Isabella smoothed her hair and retrieved her suit jacket, transforming back into CEO mode with practiced efficiency. "Mr. Chun and I were just discussing his interview." Marcus looked between them with the sharp intelligence of someone whose job required reading between lines. "Of course. Should we reschedule for later this week?" David found his voice. "Actually, I think we covered the important points." Isabella's eyes met his across the crowded lobby. "I think so, too. Marcus will be in touch." As David walked toward the building's exit, he could feel Isabella's gaze following him. At the revolving door, he turned back to see her watching from across the marble expanse, surrounded by her employees and assistants, but somehow looking completely alone. She raised her hand in a small wave, and David realized with startling clarity that everything in his life was about to change. Outside, the October afternoon had turned crisp and bright, the earlier rain washed away by autumn wind. David's phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. How did the interview go? He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed, complicated. As he walked toward the subway, David couldn't shake the image of Isabella Moreau in that service elevator, vulnerable and human and achingly beautiful. Somewhere behind him, in a glass tower that scraped the sky, a billionaire was returning to her corner office, carrying the memory of storm-cloud eyes and steady hands. Neither of them knew it yet, but their carefully constructed lives were already beginning to unravel. 3 days later, David's phone rang at 7:23 a.m. while he was nursing his second cup of coffee and staring at another rejection email. Mr. Chen, this is Marcus Dubois. I hope I'm not calling too early. David sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. Not at all. Ms. Morrow would like to meet with you again. Today, if possible. But not in the office. She's requested somewhere more informal. Informal? Bryant Park. The chess tables. 2 o'clock. She'll be wearing... Marcus paused, and David could hear papers rustling. A blue scarf. Apparently, you'll understand the significance. David did understand. The blue scarf was the one Isabella had been wearing 3 days ago in the service elevator, the one that had brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes and made her look less like a CEO and more like a woman with secrets worth discovering. I'll be there. Excellent. And Mr. Chen? Dress casually. Ms. Morrow specifically requested that this not feel like a business meeting. Bryant Park in October was a symphony of falling leaves and premature holiday decorations. The chess tables were occupied by the usual collection of regulars, old men who'd been playing the same opponents for decades, tourists trying to capture the quintessential New York experience, office workers stealing moments of peace between meetings. David found Isabella at a corner table, studying a chessboard with the intense focus he was beginning to recognize as her default expression. She was dressed in jeans, actual jeans, and a cream-colored sweater that made her look younger, more approachable, utterly unlike the polished executive he'd met in the elevator. The blue scarf was wrapped around her neck like a flag of truce. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said without looking up from the board. I wasn't sure you were serious about the informal dress code. David gestured his own outfit, khakis and a button-down shirt, the most casual clothes he owned that still seemed appropriate for meeting a billionaire. You look human. I was going to say beautiful, but human works too. Isabella's cheeks flushed pink, and David realized with a start that he just flirted with Isabella Moreau in broad daylight in the middle of Manhattan. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt surprisingly natural. Do you play? Isabella asked, indicating the chess set. Not well. You? My father taught me when I was 7. He said chess was the only game where being smart mattered more than being lucky. She moved a pawn forward. Of course. He also said that sentiment applied to life, which turned out to be spectacularly wrong. David sat across from her and moved his own pawn. What happened to him? Isabella's hand stilled overnight. For a moment, David thought she might deflect the question with the polished evasion he'd expect from someone in her position. Instead, she looked directly at him. He died when I was 16. Heart attack. A perfectly healthy man, 48 years old, dropped dead in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. She moved the knight with careful precision. It turned out all his intelligence and planning couldn't predict a genetic cardiac defect that no one knew he had. I'm sorry. The irony is that he built Morrow Industries to be his legacy, something that would outlast him. But he died before he could teach me how to run it properly. Isabella's smile was sharp with old pain. I had to figure out myself. 16 years old, inheriting a multi-million-dollar company, surrounded by board members who thought I should sell it and live off the proceeds like a proper little heiress. David studied her face, seeing past the successful CEO to the frightened teenager who'd had to grow up too fast. But you didn't sell. No, I spent the next 18 years proving that I could not only run his company, but expand it beyond anything he'd ever imagined. She captured one of David's pawns. The problem with spending your entire adult life proving yourself is that you forget to build a life worth proving yourself for. The confession hung between them like smoke, intimate and surprising. David found himself leaning forward, drawn into her orbit by the gravitational pull of shared vulnerability. "Is that why you helped me?" On the sidewalk. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, considering her next move both on the board and in the conversation. "Do you remember what you were thinking about when I found you there? That I was a failure, that I'd wasted 5 years building a career that could disappear in a 15-minute meeting with HR, that everyone who'd ever believed in me had been wrong. And now," David moved his bishop, then looked up to meet her eyes. "Now I think maybe failure is just another word for transition. That's very philosophical for someone who was unemployed 3 days ago. I've had time to think. Unemployment is excellent for introspection." David paused. "What were you thinking about? In the car before you saw me?" Isabella's hand froze over her queen. The question had clearly caught her off guard, piercing through her carefully constructed narrative to something raw underneath. "I was thinking about my mother's text message. She wanted to know if I was bringing anyone to some social event, and I realized that I've been so busy building an empire that I forgot to build relationships." Isabella's laugh was hollow. "I have 2,000 employees, offices on 3 continents, and enough money to buy small countries. But I don't have anyone to call when I can't sleep at night. What about friends? Family? Philippe, my brother, lives in London. He's got his own life, his own version of the family business to run. My mother..." Isabella shook her head. "My mother wants me to be the daughter she imagined, not the woman I became. Every conversation is a negotiation about why I'm not married, why I don't have children, why I can't be satisfied with enough success." David felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of shared isolation despite their vastly different circumstances. "So you saw me on that sidewalk and thought, here's someone who's as alone as I am?" "I saw you on that sidewalk and thought, here's someone who's fighting for something that matters to him." Isabella moved her queen forward, a bold attack that put David's king in immediate danger. "Most people I meet want something from me. Money, connections, access to my world. But you were just trying to save a broken award and a dying cactus. There was something pure about that." David studied the board, recognizing that he was about to lose both the game and something more important. "The cactus survived, by the way. Jenny repotted it while I was wallowing in self-pity." At the mention of Jenny's name, Isabella's expression shifted subtly. "She sounds like a good girlfriend." "She is. She's..." David moved his king, delaying the inevitable checkmate. "She's been with me for 2 years. Steady job, nice apartment, talks about marriage and kids like they're natural next steps in some predetermined sequence. But sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life, like I'm checking boxes on a list that someone else wrote for me." Isabella leaned back in her chair, studying David with the intensity she usually reserved for quarterly reports. "And what would your list look like?" It was a dangerous question, loaded with implications that David wasn't sure he was ready to explore. But something about the autumn afternoon, the chess game, the way Isabella looked in that blue scarf, made him want to be honest in a way that felt both reckless and necessary. I don't know, he admitted. For the longest time, I thought success meant having the right job, the right girlfriend, the right apartment in the right neighborhood. But sitting here with you, I realize I've never asked myself what I actually want. Isabella moved her queen again, and David realized with start that she just checkmated him without him noticing. The game was over, but neither of them moved to reset the board. Can I tell you something? Isabella asked. Of course. I've built an empire that employs thousands of people and generates billions in revenue. I've been on magazine covers and keynote stages. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. She traced the edge of the chessboard with her finger. But I haven't been happy in so long that I've forgotten what happiness felt like. Until 3 days ago, in a service elevator, talking to a stranger who looked at me like I was worth knowing. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. David felt his heart rate increase, recognizing that they were approaching territory that couldn't be unexplored once entered. Isabella, he started, but she held up a hand. I know, you have a girlfriend. You have a life that makes sense. I have a company to run and a reputation to maintain. This is complicated in ways that neither of us signed up for. Then why are we here? Isabella smiled, and it was the saddest, most beautiful expression David had ever seen. Because sometimes complicated is the only honest option. Have you ever found yourself at a crossroads where doing the right thing and following your heart seemed like opposite choices? What would you do if you met someone who made you question everything you thought you wanted? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the most difficult conversations help us understand our own hearts. A text message buzzed on David's phone. Jenny, dinner tonight? I have news to share. David stared at the message, then looked up to find Isabella watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. I should go, he said, but he didn't move. You should, Isabella agreed, but she didn't either. They sat in the failing afternoon light. Two people who'd found something unexpected in each other, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. Neither of them was ready for that change. But as the chess pieces sat frozen in their final positions, both David and Isabella were beginning to understand that some games, once started, could only be played to their conclusion. David's phone had been buzzing with Jenny's texts for the past hour, but he couldn't bring himself to leave Bryant Park. After the chess game ended, he and Isabella had moved to a nearby bench, ostensibly to continue their informal interview, but the pretense had long since evaporated into something more dangerous and real. Tell me about the cactus, Isabella said, pulling her blue scarf tighter against the October chill. The one Jenny gave you. David smiled despite himself. Her name is Spike. You named your cactus? Jenny named her, said every living thing deserves a proper introduction to the world. He paused, studying Isabella's profile as she watched a group of children chase pigeons near the fountain. It was our 6-month anniversary gift. Jenny said she chose a cactus because they're resilient. They can survive even when you forget to take care of them. Practical. Very. Jenny's practical about everything. She has a 5-year plan that includes my career trajectory, our wedding timeline, and the mortgage pre-approval process. David realized how that sounded and quickly added, not that there's anything wrong with planning. It's just exhausting to live your life according to someone else's spreadsheet. Is that terrible? She's an amazing woman. She deserves someone who can appreciate her organizational skills. Isabella turned to look at him directly. But you're not that someone. It wasn't a question, and David felt something shift in his chest at hearing his deepest fear spoken aloud by someone who barely knew him, but somehow understood him better than people he'd known for years. I thought I was. For 2 years, I convinced myself that stability and compatibility were the same thing as love. David picked up a fallen leaf and turned it over in his hands. But then I got fired, and instead of feeling supported, I felt managed, like I was another item on her to-do list that needed to be fixed. And how did that make you feel? Like I was disappearing. Like David Chun, the person, was being replaced by David Chun, the project. He looked up at Isabella, struck by the intensity with which she was listening. Why are you asking? Isabella was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant. Because I spent 10 years in a relationship with someone who loved the idea of me more than the reality of me. Richard Blackstone. Maybe you've heard of him? David had heard of him. Blackstone Industries. Old money. The kind of man who appeared in society pages and business journals with equal frequency. The pharmaceutical heir. That's him. We met at a charity gala when I was 24, fresh out of Harvard Business School and drowning in the pressure of running my father's company. Isabella's laugh was bitter. Richard was charming, sophisticated, and came from the right family. Everyone said we were perfect together. But you weren't. We were perfect on paper. Same social circle, compatible business interests, shared understanding of the demands of wealth and public scrutiny. But Richard fell in love with Isabella Moreau, the billionaire heiress. He never quite figured out how to love Isabella, the woman who stayed up until 3 a.m. worried about quarterly earnings and employee layoffs. David found himself leaning closer, drawn into her story by the raw honesty in her voice. What happened? He proposed at another charity gala, in front of 500 people, with a ring that had been his family for 4 generations. Very romantic, very public, very impossible to refuse without creating a scandal. Isabella's fingers worried the edge of her scarf. I said yes because saying no felt selfish. I said yes because everyone expected me to. I said yes because I thought maybe I could learn to love the life he was offering me. But you couldn't. I tried. For 8 months, I planned a wedding that felt like a merger between 2 corporations. Richard wanted the ceremony at his family estate, with a guest list that read like a who's who of American capitalism. I wanted... Isabella paused, as if surprised by her own words. I wanted something real. Something that was about us, not about our portfolios. David could picture it perfectly. Isabella trapped in a golden cage of expectations, suffocating on other people's dreams for her life. So you called it off. 3 weeks before the wedding. Richard didn't speak to me for 2 years, and when he finally did, it was to thank me. Isabella smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. He married his college girlfriend 6 months later. They have 3 kids now and look genuinely happy in all their Christmas cards. And you? I threw myself into work, built the empire bigger, bought more companies, made more money. I told myself I was too busy for relationships, too focused for love. Convinced myself that emotional connections were luxuries I couldn't afford. Isabella looked at David directly. Until 3 days ago, when a stranger helped me remember what it felt like to connect with another human being. The words hung between them, charged with possibility and danger. David felt his phone buzz again. Jenny. Probably wondered where he was, but he couldn't bring himself to check it. Isabella. I know. This is crazy. I barely know you. You have a girlfriend who loves you, and I have a company that needs me. We're from different worlds, different lives, different everything. Isabella stood up, pacing a few steps before turning back to him. But I can't stop thinking about you, about the way you looked at me in that elevator, like I was someone worth knowing, about how you make me laugh without trying, about how for the first time in years, I feel like myself instead of some carefully constructed version of what everyone expects me to be. David stood too, closing the distance between them until he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. What are you saying? I'm saying that I haven't felt this alive in years. I'm saying that talking to you feels like coming home after a long trip to places that never quite fit. I'm saying that you make me want to be brave in ways I've forgotten how to be. They were standing close enough that David could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, could count the individual snowflakes beginning to fall in her dark hair. The rational part of his mind was screaming warnings about professional boundaries and existing relationships and the impossibility of their different worlds ever truly connecting. But the rational part of his mind was being drowned out by something deeper, more primal, more honest than he'd felt in years. I haven't been happy, David said quietly. I thought I was. I thought stability and happiness were the same thing. But being with you, talking to you, feels like waking up after being asleep for years. David, I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other. I know that on paper, this makes no sense. He reached up and touched her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. But sometimes the things that make no sense are the only things that are true. Isabella leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for just a moment. When she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. What do we do? She whispered. I don't know. I've never felt anything like this before. Neither have I. They stood there in the falling snow. Two people who found something unexpected and precious and completely impossible. Around them, Bryant Park continued its evening rhythm. Commuters hurrying home, tourists taking pictures, the ordinary magic of New York life, continuing oblivious to the small revolution happening on a park bench. David's phone buzzed insistently. This time he looked. Jenny, where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours. We need to talk. Reality crashed back like cold water. David stepped away from Isabella, the spell broken by the reminder of his other life, his other responsibilities, his other heart that he was about to break. I have to go, he said, his voice rough. I know. Jenny's waiting for me. I know. This changes everything. Isabella smiled through her tears. I know. David wanted to say more, to promise something, to make sense of what was happening between them. Instead, he did the only thing that felt honest. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, a gentle benediction that tasted like snow and possibility. Whatever happens, Isabella said as he pulled away, thank you for reminding me who I am when I'm not being who everyone expects me to be. David walked away through the falling snow, leaving Isabella standing by the chess tables with her blue scarf and her brave smile. But with every step, he could feel the invisible thread that connected them pulling tighter, demanding a choice he wasn't sure he was strong enough to make. Behind him, Isabella watched until he disappeared into the crowd, then sat back down at the chess table and began setting up the pieces for a new game, one whose rules she was only beginning to understand. David's hands were shaking as he turned his key in the apartment door. The 30-minute subway ride from Bryant Park had felt like traveling between worlds, each stop taking him further from Isabella's eyes and closer to a conversation he wasn't ready to have. Jenny was in the kitchen, wearing the green dress she saved for special occasions. The table was set with their good plates, the ones they bought together 6 months ago when they'd moved in together, back when their future had seemed as predictable and comfortable as a well-worn path. There you are, Jenny smiled, but her eyes held a sharpness that made David's stomach clench. I was starting to worry. Sorry, the interview ran long, and then David realized he was about to lie and stopped himself. I needed some time to think. About the job? About everything. Jenny's smile faltered slightly. She moved to the stove, stirring something that smelled like their first date. The chicken marsala she'd made to impress him back when they were still trying to be the best versions of themselves for each other. Well, I have news that might help with the thinking. Jenny turned to face him, her expression bright with a kind of forced cheer that preceded difficult conversations. I talked to my dad today about the construction job. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. Jen, Just hear me out. He's willing to start you at 23 an hour, which is actually more than you were making at Morrison when you factor in the overtime opportunities. And there's room for advancement. He's looking for someone to eventually take over the estimating department. I'm not a construction worker. It's honest work, David, and it's stable. My dad's been in business for 30 years. He's never had to lay anyone off, never had a year where he didn't turn a profit. Jenny moved closer, her voice taking on the reasonable tone she used when she was absolutely certain she was right. This could be good for us, for our future. What if I don't want that future? The words slipped out before David could stop them, hanging in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to burn. Jenny went very still. What do you mean? David looked around their apartment, at the coordinated furniture they'd chosen together. The photos of their couple vacations arranged with geometric precision. The 5-year plan taped to the refrigerator with both their signatures at the bottom. It all looked suddenly foreign, like a museum display of someone else's life. I mean, maybe I don't want to spend the next 30 years building other people's houses, so I can afford to live in one that feels like a prison. A prison? Jenny's voice rose half an octave. This apartment that we chose together? This life that we planned together? You planned, Jen. You planned. And I went along with it because it seemed easier than figuring out what I actually wanted. Jenny stared at him for a long moment, then walked to the kitchen counter and picked up a small velvet box. David's heart stopped. I was going to wait until after dinner, Jenny said, her voice now dangerously quiet. Until after we'd talked about the job and our future, and how everything was going to work out perfectly. But maybe we need to have this conversation now. She opened the box to reveal a simple gold band, nothing flashy, nothing expensive, just a solid symbol of commitment and shared future. The kind of ring that said practical and forever and sensible choice. I bought this 3 months ago, Jenny continued, her eyes never leaving David's face. I've been carrying it around, waiting for the right moment, the right circumstances, waiting for your life to stabilize so we could take the next step. David felt like he was drowning. Jenny, is there someone else? The question hit like a physical blow. David opened his mouth to deny it, to reassure her, to lie with the kind of kindness that was really cruel. But something in Jenny's expression, a knowing sadness that suggested she'd already seen the truth, stopped him. It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. David sank into one of their matching dining chairs, suddenly exhausted by the weight of his own duplicity. I met someone. Today. Yesterday. It doesn't matter when. The woman from your interview. It wasn't a question. Jenny had always been perceptive, able to read David's moods and motivations with uncomfortable accuracy. Now that skill was turned against him like a searchlight, exposing all his hiding places. How did you? Because you came home different. Because you've been different since you lost your job, but not in the way I expected. You've been awake, like someone who'd been sleepwalking finally opened their eyes. Jenny closed the ring box with a soft click. So who is she? David could have lied, could have minimized what had happened with Isabella, reduced it to a chance encounter that meant nothing. But something about Jenny's quiet dignity, her refusal to rage or accuse, made him want to honor her with honesty. Her name is Isabella Moreau. Jenny's eyes widened. She had heard of Isabella Moreau, the billionaire. Yes. And you what? Love her? I don't know. Maybe. Yes. David ran his hands through his hair. I know how it sounds. I know how impossible it is. But when I'm with her, I feel like myself for the first time in years. Jenny was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the methodical approach she brought to everything else in her life. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but hollow. And when you're with me, Jen, when you're with me, You feel like, what, David? Like you're playing house? Like you're going through the motions? Like you're settling? The truth sat between them like a loaded weapon that neither wanted to pick up. I care about you, David said finally. I do love you, but you're not in love with me. I thought I was. I wanted to be. You're everything anyone should want. Kind, intelligent, loyal, beautiful. You deserve someone who can love you the way you deserve to be loved. And you think that's not you? I know it's not me. Jenny nodded slowly, as if he'd just confirmed something she'd suspected for months. She walked to the window that looked out over their carefully planned neighborhood, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. I knew, she said quietly. Somewhere deep down, I knew. You tried so hard to be happy with me, with us, with this life we built. But trying to be happy isn't the same as being happy. Jenny, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I know you didn't. And I'm sorry, too. For what? Jenny turned from the window, her eyes bright with tears she was too proud to shed. For falling in love with your potential instead of your reality. For trying to build a life with someone who was already looking for the exit. The words hit David like blows, each one accurate and devastating. He stood up, wanted to comfort her, but Jenny held up a hand to stop him. Don't. If you touch me right now, I'll fall apart, and I refuse to give you that power over me. They stood on opposite sides of their shared kitchen. Two people who try to love each other into shapes they were never meant to be. What happens now? David asked. Now you pack a bag and go to your mother's for a few days. Now I figure out how to untangle 2 years of sharing everything. Now we both pretend this was mutual and amicable when people ask. And after that, Jenny picked up the ring box and slipped it into her pocket. After that, you go find out if your billionaire can love the real you as much as she loves the idea of you. And I go figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone's perfect girlfriend. David wanted to argue, to somehow make this easier, but they both knew there was no easy way to end something that had been dying slowly for months. He packed a single suitcase while Jenny sat in the living room, staring at their 5-year plan like it was written in a foreign language. As he reached the door, she spoke without turning around. David, yeah, I hope she's worth it. I hope what you found with her is real, because what we had deserved better than being someone's consolation prize. David left their apartment carrying his suitcase and the weight of Jenny's dignity, knowing that he'd just broken something good in pursuit of something great, and that there was no guarantee the great would prove to be anything more than a beautiful illusion. David spent 3 days at his mother's apartment, sleeping on the same fold-out couch where he'd nursed broken hearts and bruised dreams throughout his 20s. The small space felt even smaller now, filled with the weight of his mother's worried glances and carefully unasked questions. You want to tell me what really happened? His mother finally asked on Thursday morning, setting a cup of coffee in front of him with the no-nonsense authority of someone who'd raised a son through adolescence and expected honesty in return. David stared into the coffee, like it might contain answers. Jenny and I broke up. I figured that much from the suitcase and the 3-day stubble. Maria Chin settled into the chair across from him, her work uniform already crisp despite the early hour. What I want to know is why you look guilty instead of heartbroken. Because I am guilty. Of what? David met his mother's eyes, the same dark brown as his own, but weathered by 47 years of single motherhood and double shifts at the diner. Of falling in love with someone else while I was still with Jenny. His mother was quiet for a moment, processing this with the careful consideration she brought to all of life's complications. Tell me about her. Nam. Tell me about the woman who made you brave enough to leave a safe relationship for something uncertain. So David told her about the rain and the broken award, about Isabella kneeling on the sidewalk in her expensive coat, about chess games and service elevators, and the way it felt to finally recognize himself in someone else's eyes. When he finished, his mother was smiling. Not the polished smile she used for difficult customers, but the real one she saved for moments when she was proud of her son. "What?" David asked. "You're describing someone you love." "I barely know her." "You know enough." Maria reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "David, you spent your whole life trying to be what other people needed instead of figuring out what you needed. Maybe it's time to try being selfish. What if I'm wrong? What if this thing with Isabella is just some fantasy I build up because she's beautiful and successful and completely out of my league?" "Then you'll be wrong. But at least you'll be wrong about something that made you feel alive instead of something that made you feel safe." David's phone had been buzzing intermittently for 3 days. Texts from Isabella that he couldn't bring himself to answer, not because he didn't want to, but because once he started that conversation, there would be no going back. "David, I hope you're okay." No pressure to respond, but I wanted you to know I'm thinking about you. Marcus says the marketing position is still available if you want it. No strings attached. Just a job offer from someone who believes in your potential. I can't stop thinking about yesterday, about how you made me feel like myself again. Whatever you decide, thank you for that gift. Each message made David's chest tight with longing and terror in equal measure. He wanted to run to her, to show up at her office and declare his feelings like some romantic comedy hero. But he also wanted to disappear, to avoid the inevitable moment when reality would intrude on whatever magical connection they'd found. On Thursday afternoon, David finally worked up the courage to call Isabella. Her assistant answered on the second ring. "Ms. Moreau's office, Marcus speaking." "Hi, this is David Chun. I was wondering if I could speak with Isabella, Ms. Moreau." "Mr. Chun, she's been hoping to hear from you. Unfortunately, she's in meetings until 6, but I could schedule you for her." "Actually, could you give me her address? Her home address?" There was a pause. "Mr. Chun, I'm not authorized to give out personal information." "Marcus, please. I need to see her. Tonight. It's important." Another pause, longer this time. "She lives at the Meridian Tower. Penthouse level. But Mr. Chen, she's been different since Tuesday. Distracted. If you're planning to break her heart, maybe do it quickly instead of drawing it out." The Meridian Tower rose 67 floors into Manhattan sky, its glass facade reflecting the city lights like a vertical constellation. David stood on the sidewalk outside, staring up at the penthouse level and trying to convince himself that this wasn't the most insane thing he'd ever attempted. The doorman was polished and professional in a way that expensive buildings demanded. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm here to see Isabella Moreau." "Penthouse. Your name?" "David Chan." The doorman consulted his computer, frowning slightly. "I don't see you on Ms. Moreau's guest list." "Could you call up? Tell her I'm here?" "Sir, Ms. Moreau has very specific instructions about unannounced visitors." "Please." David heard the desperation in his own voice and didn't care. "Just tell her David Chin is here. If she doesn't want to see me, I'll leave." The doorman studied David for a moment, perhaps recognizing something authentic in his plea. He picked up the house phone. "Ms. Moreau, I have David Chin here to see you. He's not on the list, but he says—" The doorman paused, listening. "Yes, ma'am. Right away." He hung up and gestured toward the elevator bank. "Penthouse level. She's expecting you." The elevator ride to the 67th floor felt longer than David's entire life up to that point. When the doors opened directly into Isabella's foyer, because of course she had a private elevator, he was struck momentarily speechless by the sheer scope of her world. The penthouse was a masterpiece of modern architecture and old money taste. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park and the city beyond. The furniture was elegant but comfortable, expensive but lived in. Original artwork lined the walls. Pieces David recognized from museum catalogs, but had never imagined seeing in someone's home. Isabella appeared from what looked like the kitchen, wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater that somehow made her look more beautiful than any designer gown could have. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was free of makeup, revealing a vulnerability that took David's breath away. "You came," she said simply. "I came." They stood 20 feet apart in her palatial living room, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them like smoke. "I broke up with Jenny." Isabella's eyes widened. "David, it wasn't because of you." "Not entirely. It was because she deserved someone who could love her completely, and I finally admitted that I wasn't that person." David moved closer, drawn by the gravitational pull that seemed to exist whenever they were in the same space. "But it was also because of you. Because you showed me what it feels like to connect with someone so completely that pretending feels impossible. I don't want to be the reason you destroyed something good. You weren't the reason. You were the catalyst. There's a difference." Isabella walked to her windows, looking out over the glittering expanse of her city. "What do you want from me, David?" "I want to know if what happened between us was real. I want to know if you felt what I felt. I want to know if there's a chance that two people from completely different worlds can find a way to build something together. And if there isn't, then at least I'll know I was brave enough to ask." Isabella turned from the window, and David could see tears gleaming in her eyes. "I've been in love before, David. Or I thought I was. But it always felt like work. Constant negotiation and compromise and trying to fit into shapes that never quite felt right. And this feels like coming home after years of being lost." Isabella moved closer, close enough that David could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of needing someone again, of giving someone the power to hurt me, of building something beautiful with you, and then watching it crumble under the weight of reality." David reached out and took her hands, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "I'm scared too. I'm scared that I'm not enough for your world. I'm scared that I'm unemployed and broke and completely out of my depth. I'm scared that this is some beautiful dream I'll wake up from." "Then why are you here?" "Because being scared of the right thing is better than being safe with the wrong thing." David lifted one of her hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her palm. "Because you make me want to be braver than I've ever been. Because I'd rather fail at something real than succeed at something that feels like settling." Isabella's tears finally spilled over, tracking silver paths down her cheeks. "I love you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and complicated and utterly transformative. "I love you too," David whispered, and then he was kissing her, tasting salt and promise and the possibility of a future he'd never dared to imagine. When they broke apart, Isabella rested her forehead against his. "This is crazy. Completely insane. We barely know each other." "I know enough. I'm a billionaire CEO with a company to run and shareholders to appease and a public image to maintain. I'm an unemployed marketing specialist who just ended a 2-year relationship and is currently sleeping on his mother's couch." Isabella laughed despite her tears. "We're a disaster waiting to happen." "Probably. So, what do we do?" David cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the fact that this extraordinary woman was looking at him like he held all the answers to questions she'd been asking her entire life. "We try," he said. "We figure out as we go. We make mistakes and learn from them. We choose each other every day until choosing each other feels as natural as breathing. And if it doesn't work, then at least we'll know we were brave enough to try." Isabella smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise over a carefully constructed world. Okay, David Chen. Let's fall in love properly. Let's build something impossible together. Let's see what happens when two people from different worlds decide that maybe their worlds aren't as different as they thought. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York City sparkled with 10 million possibilities. But David only cared about the one he was holding in his arms. What does it mean to choose love over safety? Have you ever had to make a decision that required you to be brave instead of practical? Sometimes the most important choices we make are the ones that scare us most. What would you choose? Share your thoughts below. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed to the windows of David's new office on the 34th floor of the Morrow Industries building, casting everything in golden light that made even the most mundane spreadsheet look like poetry. He'd been the senior director of marketing for 3 months now, having earned the promotion through late nights, innovative campaigns, and the kind of passionate work that happened when someone finally found their professional calling. But it wasn't the job that made David smile as he reviewed the quarterly reports. It was the framed photo on his desk. Him and Isabella at the Farmers Market in Union Square, both laughing at something Spike the cactus was apparently doing in her arms. The photo captured a moment from their third official date, when Isabella had insisted on buying a proper pot for his rescue plant, and ended up purchasing half the vendor's inventory because Spike looked lonely. "Good morning, Mr. Chun." Marcus appeared in the doorway with his usual immaculate efficiency, but his formal greeting carried a warmth that hadn't existed 6 months ago. "Isabella asked me to remind you about lunch today. 1 o'clock at Bryant Park. Same chess table." David grinned. Every Thursday for the past 6 months, he and Isabella had met for lunch at the same chess table where they'd first admitted their feelings for each other. It had become their tradition, an hour stolen from board meetings and marketing campaigns to remember who they were when they weren't being the people their jobs required them to be. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What did you think when Isabella first told you she was dating me?" Marcus considered the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "Honestly, I thought she'd lost her mind. A CEO dating an unemployed stranger she'd met on a sidewalk seemed like the plot of a romance novel, not a business strategy. And now I think you might be the best thing that ever happened to her." Marcus smiled, a real smile, not a professional one. "She's happier, Mr. Chun. For 10 years, I watched her build an empire while forgetting to build a life. You reminded her that she could do both." At 12:47, David made his way to Bryant Park, carrying the picnic lunch he prepared in his new apartment. The one-bedroom place in Brooklyn that Isabella had helped him find and absolutely refused to let him feel embarrassed about. "It has character," she'd said, studying the exposed brick walls and questionable plumbing with the same intensity she brought to merger negotiations. "And it's yours. That makes it perfect." He found Isabella already at their table, staring at the chessboard with an expression he'd learned to recognize as her concentrating face. She was wearing a navy dress that brought out the amber in her eyes and a smile that transformed her entire face when she saw him approaching. "You're early," David said, bending to kiss her cheek. "So are you? I think we're both getting predictable in our old age." "Speak for yourself. I'm still young and mysterious." Isabella laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep and genuine. "David Chun, you are many wonderful things, but mysterious isn't one of them. You wear your heart on your sleeve, your emotions on your face, and your intentions in every gesture you make. Is that a bad thing? It's the thing I love most about you." 6 months, and David still felt his chest tighten every time Isabella said she loved him, not because he doubted it. The certainty of their connection had only grown stronger with time, but because the miracle of being loved by someone like her never quite felt real. They played chess while eating sandwiches David had made with care, and Isabella had praised with the enthusiasm of someone who'd spent most of her adult life eating catered meals at business lunches. The game was closer than usual. Isabella's strategic mind matched against David's growing understanding of her patterns and tells. "I have news," Isabella said as she captured one of his bishops. "Good news or bad news?" "Depends on how you feel about meeting my mother." David's hand froze over his knight. In 6 months of dating, Isabella had mentioned her mother exactly 3 times, always with the kind of careful distance that suggested complicated history. She wants to meet me? She's demanded to meet you. Apparently, Philippe told her I was glowing during our last video call, and she's decided that anyone who can make me glow needs to be properly evaluated. Isabella's smile was rueful. Fair warning. She's going to ask about your financial prospects, your family background, and your intentions regarding my future happiness. She may also offer you money to go away. And if I don't take the money, then she'll probably decide she likes you. David moved his knight, putting Isabella's king in check. When? This weekend. Dinner at her place in the Hamptons. Very formal, very intimidating, very much a test I'm hoping you'll pass because I'm tired of hiding how happy you make me. Isabella stared at the board, realizing she'd walked into David's trap. Her king had nowhere to go. "Checkmate," David said softly. "So it is." Isabella looked up at him with an expression that made his heart race. "David, there's something else." "What?" Isabella reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Expensive paper, her name written in elegant script. "I got this yesterday. It's an invitation to Richard Blackstone's wedding anniversary party. 10 years married to his college girlfriend." David studied her face, trying to read the emotions flickering across her features. "How do you feel about that?" "Grateful. Grateful that I was smart enough to let him go. Grateful that he found someone who could love him the way he deserved. Grateful that I waited long enough to find you." Isabella reached across the table and took his hand. "But mostly grateful that I finally understand the difference between being with someone who makes sense on paper and being with someone who makes sense in your heart." "And I make sense in your heart?" "David, you make sense everywhere. You make sense in my office when you challenge my ideas and make them better. You make sense in my apartment when you cook dinner and tell me stories about your day. You make sense in my bed when you hold me like I'm something precious instead of something to be conquered." Isabella's voice grew soft. "You make sense in my life in ways I never knew I needed someone to make sense." David felt tears prick his eyes. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Good. Love should be a little scary. Safe love isn't really love at all. It's just a habit with better marketing." They finished their game in comfortable silence, the autumn afternoon wrapping around them like a promise. When they packed up the chess set, Isabella stood and smoothed her dress. "I should get back. The Tokyo office wants to discuss the sustainability initiative, and there's a board meeting at 4. And I should get back to the Peterson campaign. We're launching next week." But neither of them moved. Instead, they stood beside their chess table in Bryant Park, holding hands like teenagers afraid to say goodbye. "Isabella? Thank you." "For what?" "For kneeling in the rain. For seeing something in me that I couldn't see in myself. For taking a chance on someone who had nothing to offer but the potential to love you completely." Isabella stepped closer, close enough that David could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, and could count the individual snowflakes beginning to fall in her dark hair. "David Chun," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who commanded boardrooms and the tenderness of someone who had finally learned to command her own heart. "You had everything to offer. You just didn't know it yet." She kissed him then, in the middle of Bryant Park with chess players and tourists and the entire city of New York as their witnesses. It was the kind of kiss that tasted like coming home and setting out on adventures in equal measure. When they broke apart, Isabella rested her forehead against his. "See you tonight?" "Wouldn't miss it." "Good. I'm making dinner." "You're making dinner?" I'm ordering dinner and pretending I made it. David laughed. Perfect. I love your pretend cooking. I love everything about you. They walked out of the park together. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something beautiful from the pieces of their separately broken lives. Isabella headed back to her glass tower and her board meetings and her billion-dollar decisions. David headed back to his office and his marketing campaigns and his rescued cactus that had somehow become the mascot of the 34th floor. But they were no longer separate people living separate lives. They were David and Isabella, partners in love and life, and the daily miracle of choosing each other again and again. 3 months later, the engagement party was held at Isabella's penthouse, with views of Central Park spread out below, like a promise of all the adventures still to come. The guest list was small but meaningful. David's mother, beaming with pride and wearing the dress Isabella had helped her pick out. Philippe, charming and sophisticated and genuinely delighted with his future brother-in-law. Marcus, who become not just Isabella's assistant but David's friend. And Jenny. David had been surprised when Isabella insisted on inviting his ex-girlfriend. But Isabella had been adamant. She was part of your story, Isabella had said. She deserves to see that the story had a happy ending for everyone. Jenny arrived looking radiant in a way David had never seen before. She was engaged herself now, to a carpenter named Michael who made her laugh and appreciated her organizational skills and looked at her like she hung the moon. They'd met, ironically, when Jenny had called her father about a construction job and ended up talking to the man who would become her future husband. You look happy, Jenny said, finding David on the terrace where he'd stepped out for air. I am. You look happy, too. I am. Jenny studied his face with the careful attention of someone who'd once loved him enough to want to build a life with him. She's good for you. You think so? David, I've never seen you look the way you look at her. Like she's the answer to questions you didn't even know you were asking. I'm sorry, David said quietly, for how things ended between us. For not being brave enough to be honest sooner. Don't be sorry. Be grateful. If you'd been brave enough to be honest sooner, I might never have met Michael. Jenny smiled. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is break your heart cleanly so you can heal it properly. Inside, Isabella was moving to the party with the graceful efficiency of someone who'd spent her life hosting events but had never before hosted one that truly mattered to her. She paused beside every guest, making sure they felt welcomed and valued, but her eyes kept finding David across the room. When the last guest had left and the caterers had cleaned up, David and Isabella sat on her couch with Spike the cactus between them, still in their party clothes but barefoot and content. Good party, David said. The best. Isabella curled up against his side. Your mother likes me. My mother loves you. She told me you're the daughter she always wanted but was too polite to ask for. And your ex-girlfriend doesn't hate me. Jenny's happy for us. She understands that sometimes people have to break each other's hearts to find their way to where they belong. Isabella was quiet for a moment, playing with the engagement ring David had given her. Not a family heirloom or a society statement, but a simple solitaire that he'd chosen because it reminded him of her eyes in sunlight. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if it hadn't been raining that day? Isabella asked. If you hadn't dropped your box, if I hadn't seen you, if we just walked past each other like strangers do every day in the city? David considered the question, thinking about all the small moments that had led them to this larger moment. I think we would have found each other eventually. Maybe not that day, maybe not that way, but somehow, some things are just inevitable. You think we were inevitable? I think love is inevitable when it's real. It finds a way. David pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Besides, it wasn't just the rain. It was you choosing to stop. It was you choosing to help. It was you choosing to see someone who needed kindness and deciding that kindness was more important than staying dry. And it was you choosing to be grateful instead of embarrassed. You choose to see me as a person instead of an opportunity. You chose to earn what I offered instead of taking what I gave. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Two people who'd found their way to each other through the beautiful chaos of rain and loss and unexpected love. Isabella? When we get married, can we have a ceremony in Bryant Park? At our chess table, Isabella lifted her head to look at him, her eyes bright with tears of joy. David Chun, that is the most perfect idea you've ever had. Really, let's get married where we fell in love. Let's have our wedding where we learned to be brave together. Let's start our forever at the place where we finally came home. Outside their window, New York City continued its endless dance of ambition and dreams, of strangers becoming lovers and ordinary moments becoming extraordinary memories. But inside their penthouse, David and Isabella had already found everything they'd been searching for, not in the accumulation of success or the achievement of goals, but in the simple miracle of being completely known and completely loved by another human being. Spike the cactus sat between them on the couch, thriving in ways that defied all botanical expectations, a small green reminder that sometimes the most unlikely things could bloom in the most unexpected places. Just like love, just like them.